You've been wrong about fire your entire life. You don't think so because fire feels obvious. You light a match, you see a flame, something gets hot and turns black, maybe disappears as smoke. It feels like a simple part of the world, like rain or wind. Fire burns, fire destroys, fire hurts if you get too close. End of story. But that obvious picture is a trick your brain plays on you. Fire is not what it looks like. It's not a thing. It's not an object. It's not even really stuff. And the way Richard Feynman looked at it is so different from what you were taught that once you really see it, you can't go back to your old idea. You realize you've been surrounded your whole life by something that is, in a very literal sense, trapped star energy escaping in a panic. Let's slow down. Imagine a dry log on the floor. It's been there for months, maybe years. Air all around it, the same air you're breathing. Inside that air there's oxygen, swirling and bouncing around, crashing into the surface of the wood all the time. Inside the log there's carbon, hydrogen, and a bunch of other atoms locked into long, tangled molecules. You've got oxygen outside, carbon inside, all the ingredients for fire sitting together in the same room, and nothing is happening. No flames, no heat, no glowing, just a boring, motionless log. You've walked past that situation 1,000,000 times and never thought, wait, why is this not already burning? If you've been taught a simple picture of chemistry, you might imagine atoms snapping together the moment they want to. Oxygen likes carbon, so why doesn't every carbon atom just leap into the arms of an oxygen atom and explode with energy the instant they meet? The reason is one of the most important ideas in all of nature. There is a barrier between what the atoms are now and what they would rather be. Not a wall made of material, but a hill in the landscape of energy. The wood plus oxygen is like a ball resting in a shallow dip on top of a hill. Downhill, far below, is a deep valley where carbon and oxygen sit together as carbon dioxide. That valley is safer, calmer, and has lower energy. The ball would prefer to be down there, but there's a small rise in front of it. Unless something gives it a kick, it never finds that deeper valley. It can sit there for decades, centuries, forever, just waiting. That's what you're really looking at when you see wood in air. A system that is not as relaxed as it could be, stuck behind a small energy barrier. Metastable, ready, loaded. The atoms are jostling and colliding all the time, but not quite hard enough in the right way to jump over the barrier. So the log seems calm. It is not calm. It is a paused explosion. Now bring in a match. People talk about creating fire with a match as if the flame appears out of nothing. That's not what's happening. The match doesn't create the energy. The match cheats the barrier. Striking the match head turns friction into heat. That heat makes nearby atoms jiggle faster. Suddenly a few oxygen molecules slam into a few bits of carbon with just enough violence to clamber over the energy hill. Once they do that, they rearrange into a lower energy form, carbon dioxide and water vapor. Lower energy means some energy has to be dumped out, and it doesn't politely ask where to go. It bursts out as a violent motion of nearby atoms. Those newly formed molecules shoot away, battering their neighbors, making those neighbors move faster. Some of those neighbors are also carbon and oxygen. Now they're hitting hard enough to get over the hill too. They rearrange, dump out energy, slam into more atoms, make them move faster, and the process snowballs. You go from nothing visible to suddenly there is a fierce, dancing flame, because what was once a rare event becomes a chain reaction. One reaction makes enough heat to trigger several more. Those make enough heat to trigger dozens, then hundreds, then billions. In a tiny region of space above the wood, the rate of reactions runs away, faster and faster, cascading through the material. That runaway chain of bond breaking and bond making is what you call fire. Notice what hasn't appeared anywhere in this story, a special substance called fire flowing out of the wood. There isn't one. There is no fire stuff. There is no element of flame. There is just a temporary region where matter is furiously rearranging itself, dumping out energy as motion and light. The brightness and heat you see are side effects of atoms reorganizing themselves into a more relaxed, lower energy way of existing. Fire is not an object. Fire is the visible trace of a chemical riot. So what is the heat of a fire really? You were probably told something like heat is energy and fire gives off heat. True, but useless. Feynman hated explanations that just swap a word for a mystery. If you want to think like he did, you ask, what does that actually mean? On the microscopic level, heat is nothing more than motion. Atoms vibrating, molecules twisting, spinning, bumping, racing around. The hotter something is, the more violently its atoms are jiggling, on average. When you stick your hand near a flame, what you are feeling is not some invisible fluid called heat leaving the fire and entering you. You are sticking your skin into a storm. Fast-moving gas molecules smash into the molecules in your skin, making them move faster. Nerves in your skin are sensitive to that increased jiggling. They scream, and your brain translates that scream as hot. Move your hand away, now. The same goes for the pot on a stove. When you hold a metal pan above a fire, atoms in the hot gas crash into atoms in the metal over and over, shaking them. Those atoms jostle their neighbors. The vibration spreads through the metal like a rumor passed from person to person. Eventually, the atoms at the far side of the pan, the ones touching the water, are also jiggling more violently. They bash into water molecules, speed them up, and the temperature rises. All your experience of warming things up is, at bottom, more frantic motion being passed along from one particle to the next. What then is the light? Why does this violent reshuffling of atoms glow? Here you have to zoom in even further into the electrons in those atoms and molecules. They don't move like planets, but they do occupy specific energy levels, like rungs on a ladder. In a calm, cool piece of wood, most electrons sit on lower rungs. In the frenzy of a flame, collisions can shove electrons to higher rungs. They don't like staying there. When they drop back down, they must get rid of the extra energy. One way to do that is to kick another particle, convert the difference into motion. Another way is to spit out a packet of light, a photon. The color of that photon depends on how far the electron fell. Different atoms have different allowed rungs, so they emit different colors. Sodium tends to give yellowish light. Other elements glow in reds, greens, blues. That's how fireworks paint the sky. Now, look again at a campfire in your mind. The yellow-orange flicker is lots of hot gas and tiny glowing particles emitting light because their electrons are being kicked around and then relaxing. The smoke above is not burned stuff in some vague sense. It's actual microscopic bits of carbon and other fragments that didn't fully react, still hot enough to ride upward on rising air. The invisible gases drifting away, carbon dioxide and water vapor, carry most of the mass of the original log. Almost everything that the tree used to build itself has left as gas. The few grams of grey ash left behind are the minerals, the part that really did come from the soil. That brings us to a deeper, stranger truth Feynman loved. The part of the tree that burns never really came from the ground. That alone should bother you. You imagine a tree sucking stuff out of the soil, turning dirt into wood. If that were true, a forest would leave behind giant holes as it grows. But it doesn't. People have done the experiment. Take a pot of soil, weigh it, plant a seed, water it. Let the plant grow bigger and bigger. After years, you weigh the soil again. Its mass barely changes. Yet the plant might weigh tens or hundreds of times more than the original seed. Somehow, that material came from somewhere else. The bulk of a tree's mass was stolen from the air. Every second, leaves are pulling molecules of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Each of those molecules has one carbon atom and two oxygen atoms tightly bonded together in a very comfortable arrangement. The tree, using molecules inside its cells, takes in that carbon dioxide and water and, with the help of sunlight, forces the bonds to rearrange. The oxygen is kicked out and vented back into the air. The carbon is stitched together into long chains and rings and frameworks, sugars, cellulose, lignin. That is what you see when you look at wood. Complicated arrangements of carbon-based molecules that used to be floating in the sky. But here's the crucial part. Separating carbon from oxygen like that is hard work. Those atoms are happier together. To pull them apart, the tree needs energy from somewhere. That somewhere is sunlight. Photons from the sun slam into special molecules in the leaves, raising electrons to higher energy states, and the plant uses those energized electrons to drive the chemical reactions that rip carbon dioxide apart and knit the carbon into the body of the plant. The oxygen the plant releases is literally waste. The energy from sunlight is not just in the tree in some mystical way. It has been converted into the specific pattern of bonds in the wood. The arrangement of atoms in the tree corresponds to a higher energy configuration than everything mixed with oxygen as gas. So when you burn that wood, what are you really watching? You are watching the universe undo the work that sunlight did. Carbon that was ripped away from oxygen is being allowed to rush back. The tree spent years, even decades, slowly assembling that complicated high-energy structure. In minutes or hours, fire tears it down. The energy that the tree used from sunlight to separate carbon and oxygen to lift them up into that fragile arrangement is paid back. It reappears as frantic motion and glowing light. When people say fire is stored sunlight being released, that's the idea. The energy originally came from nuclear reactions in the sun's core, traveled to Earth as light, got converted into chemical potential energy in living tissue, and then returned to the world as heat and light again when those bonds fall apart. Notice now how different this is from the picture you probably started with. Fire as a kind of orange thing that lives on logs and consumes them. The truth is a cycle, sun to leaf, leaf to wood, wood plus oxygen back to gas and energy. The flame is the visible middle of a bookkeeping process that starts in the core of a star and ends in the motion of molecules in the air around you. But there's another twist in this story. The oxygen that makes fire possible, the 20% of the atmosphere that lets fire rage and lets you breathe, wasn't always there either. The early Earth's atmosphere was mostly carbon dioxide, nitrogen, water vapor, and other gases. Then, over unimaginably long times, microscopic organisms learned to use sunlight to rip carbon dioxide apart and discard oxygen. At first, that oxygen rusted rocks and reacted with dissolved iron in the oceans. Once the rocks and oceans were satisfied, the oxygen started to accumulate in the air. To those early microbes, oxygen was poison. It killed many of them. But it also made something new possible. Very fast, very efficient ways of releasing energy by combining fuel with this aggressive gas. Fire depends on this accident of biology. If life had not spent hundreds of millions of years slowly vomiting oxygen into the atmosphere, your match wouldn't do anything. Wood and air would not be a flammable mixture. The very fact that a dry forest can burst into flames when lightning strikes is the result of ancient organisms changing the composition of the sky. Now turn inward. You like to think of your body as something very different from a fireplace, but chemically they're playing the same game. Inside your cells, in tiny compartments, molecules of sugar and fat are constantly being combined with oxygen. The process is slower, spread out over many controlled steps, but the basic reaction is the same as in a flame. Carbon and hydrogen plus oxygen become carbon dioxide and water, and energy is released. Your cells don't let that energy all rush into random motion. They trap it in intermediate forms, molecule by molecule, using it to drive pumping, building, thinking, moving. But the waste products you exhale, carbon dioxide and water vapor, are exactly what rises from a campfire when it burns cleanly. From the point of view of the chemistry, you are a gentle, regulated, low-temperature fire. The warmth you feel in your own body is the signature of continuous combustion. This is Feynman's style of truth. Not just fire is chemical energy being released, but you, the tree, the flame, and the air are all part of the same rearrangement loop, powered by the sun. And here is the disturbingly different part. When you look around your house right now, you are surrounded by quiet explosives that only feel safe because the barrier is still intact. Paper, wood, fabric, gasoline in a car, even the fat in your own body. All of these are highly energetic arrangements of atoms that could release a lot of energy if allowed to fall into lower energy combinations with oxygen. They do not do that spontaneously because of the same hill we talked about earlier, the activation energy barrier. The world you live in is full of materials that are energetically perched, just stable enough under everyday conditions, yet ready to collapse to a more relaxed state if given the right kind of shove. That's why most things don't simply burst into flames as you watch. At room temperature, molecules don't collide hard enough or in the right way often enough to start the runaway process. But give them a push, a spark, a hot surface, a focused beam of light, and a few reactions can begin. Once those reactions produce enough heat, the local temperature rises, the collisions get more energetic, and the chain reaction can suddenly take off. This is why, for example, a greasy rag left in a closed pile can spontaneously ignite. Slow reactions generate a little heat. The heat can't dissipate, so the temperature creeps up until the barrier is low enough that the runaway cascade can start. Firefighters worry about this. The universe is full of ways to accidentally give flammable materials that first dangerous shove. From this angle, fire safety rules stop being a list of arbitrary warnings and become obvious physics. To stop a fire, you just have to break the loop. Take away the fuel, no more atoms to rearrange. Take away the oxygen, no partner to snap onto. Take away the heat, the collisions slow, and the barrier becomes too high again. Every extinguisher, every fire break, every stop, drop, and roll is a trick for cutting one side of this triangle so the chain reaction can't feed itself. So you've gone from fire is a bright thing that burns stuff to fire is the visible part of an avalanche of chemical reactions. But Feynman would push you one level deeper still. He'd remind you that the energy entering and leaving these reactions is tied to the structure of space and matter themselves. The bonds between atoms exist because electrons arrange themselves in particular patterns, which they do because of quantum rules. The photons from the sun that start this whole cycle exist because protons are fusing in a star's core, releasing energy determined by the mass difference between initial and final nuclei, which is governed by the fundamental forces of nature. The reason a log can warm your hands on a winter night traces all the way back to how the universe allows matter to clump, stars to ignite, and atoms to bond. When you sit by a fire now, maybe you imagine that you are watching something simple, something almost primitive. In reality, you are watching the output of a chain of events that begins with hydrogen clouds collapsing in deep space and ends with a nervous system able to stand there and wonder what it all means. The flame is just the interface where your eyes can detect the bookkeeping being done. Carbon, oxygen, sunlight, gravity, quantum mechanics, they all meet there, in that dancing shape. And this is why the old childish picture of fire as orange stuff that lives on wood and goes up is not just wrong, it's a waste. It hides the fact that what you are seeing is a tiny piece of the entire universe's energy story playing out in front of you. You are not just watching something be destroyed, you are watching information about the past, about sunshine on leaves, about ancient microbes that filled the air with oxygen, about quantum rules that shaped the periodic table, being converted into motion and light and then diffusing away. So the next time you light a candle or see a gas stove flicker on, don't tell yourself, "That's just fire, it burns fuel." That's the version of you who was wrong your whole life. See it for what it really is. A temporarily self-sustaining cascade of chemical rearrangements made possible by the way atoms prefer to be arranged, triggered by a small violation of stability, powered by energy that once left the sun as light and got trapped in matter, now rushing back out as motion and glow. The soft flame in front of you is not a simple thing. It is the release of tension in the fabric of nature. Feynman's truth about fire isn't some poetic metaphor. It's disturbingly literal. You, the tree, the atmosphere, and the star in the sky are engaged in a continuous exchange. Fire is just when that exchange becomes obvious enough that even your naked eyes can see it.